Thought I'd post up an update on my Samurai. Pulling the front end apart. I've been having problems with the front lock right. When I get it out and pulled apart, I'll show why. It's not really the lock right's fault. But anyway, I've been tired of the lock right. Anyway, I'd like to switch to selectable lockers. And the timing actually worked out really well. This last trip, they began popping and skipping real bad again. And about the same time, I got a message from Tony from Zepka Customs. He's the US distributor for TRE4x4 parts. They sell air and electric operated lockers for tons of different vehicles. But he offered to sponsor me and supplied me with one of their E-Lockers. So I'm going to put this in the front. Super simple, which I'm really excited about. I mean, literally, you supply it power and ground, it locks. It just uses an electromagnet, which is this top section. And then as it's spinning, once the magnet's engaged, it creates friction here, and it holds this top piece from rotating as this piece continues to rotate. And so this angle here, it's like a cam, and it forces these pins down. There's 4 of these pins around the differential, and those pins go down, and in this lower section is a coupler that locks. It's basically got internal and external splines that lock the bottom side gear to the case, locking the differential. Very simple, seems pretty foolproof. I mean, electromagnets have been around for 100 plus years. Super reliable, super simple. So this one is this part number here, the TE204. It's actually a sidekick rear, early version with the 10 ring gear bolts, which is what I've got in the front of my front axle, my front hybrid axle. So I'm gonna give this a try. Hopefully I love it, and I really would like to put one in the rear as well. I race my Samurai occasionally, but most of the time I play with it in the sand dunes. And you can see here, these are hiding behind all the steel. These are my sand tires. And it actually works really good with these. And I'd love to have turning brakes, because that's one thing that it doesn't do really great. It doesn't steer super hard. So with a selectable locker, I could run turning brakes, and that would be awesome. So anyway, having to keep the Samurai outside right now. Luckily, I've got a covered little porch area behind my shop. So anyway, pulling this all apart. Get the third member out, kind of give everything once over. It's been a little while since I've had this front end apart. Check all the kingpin bearings and seals and everything else. I mean, so far it's been holding up good, besides the lock right issues. The main issue with the lock right is that third member was really put together of a bunch of junk I had laying around, and the case, the carrier case I did not have complete. So I didn't have the side gears and thrust washers and all that stuff that came from the factory together. And that's actually pretty important for a lock right, is you need the thrust washers that were fit for that carrier, because everything's, every carrier is a little different. And those thrust washers come in various thicknesses to basically set up the spider gears and the side gears to mesh correctly. And if you don't have that, the lock right can have issues, and that's been my problem. And I've pulled it apart a couple times, but it's not an easy thing with the equipment I have to measure and try to get those clearances right. Because basically you're trying to get the side gears spaced perfectly from the cross pins, evenly from the cross pins. And I haven't been able to figure out a way to measure that really well. I've messed with it a couple times, and honestly, I'm just over it. the E Locker is going to be so much better. So hopefully I'm going to get this done, and working on sway bar and a couple other things, trying to get this ready for either King of the Hammers coming up here this next year, or I don't know, I'm not sure, possibly some other race, as well as other things. I'm gonna try to hit the Rubicon Trail again soon. I'd like to go try some other places out, so gotta get this thing straightened away. So I'm gonna get to work, and I will come back when I've got the third member out, and I can kind of show what's going on in there and start setting up that E Locker. One more quick thing I wanted to point out is if you get rid of the dust shield, that's normally here, that sits behind the brake disc. If you get rid of that, then it clears up access more easily to these bolts here, and then you can pull this whole spindle snout and bearing hub assembly all in one piece when you're doing work to the third member or something. So you can pull this all apart and not have to play with the bearings. It all stays assembled. You don't have to get all greasy or play with resetting up the preload. It just stays all in one piece, and then you just got to pull the knuckles like normal, slide the axles out. Saves quite a bit of time, and makes the job a lot cleaner and easier. I just put these in a bag to keep them clean, so I don't even have to touch them. Put them back together. Okay, so here's the third member out of the rig. I've already pulled the caps. Since I'm changing the carrier, there's no sense in really keeping track of, you know, where this is at. If you're just doing a simple lock right, you can mark these. I usually will take a paint pen and mark them, and then turn it one turn loose. And the same thing on this side, one turn loose or counterclockwise. And that gives you room to get this in and out. And then I usually will, it's easier with two people, hold these spanner nuts in as you pull the carrier out, so nothing moves. And then when you install the lock right and put it all back together and drop it in, you can turn it your one turn and you'll be right back to where it was. But since in this case I'm changing the carrier, even the slightest difference in dimension from here to where the bearing sits, you know, will affect the pattern as well as bearing preload. So these I just loosened up because I'm not trying to keep track. So I'll just back these off, and in fact, you can just take them off. And then if you haven't done this before, it's important to mark and keep track of these caps. They have to stay where they came from. You know, these you can't turn them around backwards, but you know, if you were to put it on the wrong side, the threads wouldn't line up, and the bores may not be perfectly aligned. So you paint pen, or like a lot of people will do like one center punch, and then two center punches and two center punches kind of thing. It's a pretty good way of doing it. So I'm gonna get this the rest of the way pulled out. I'm gonna pull the ring gear off, and I'm gonna open this up just to see the amount of metal that came out of this. I'm pretty sure the dowels in the Lockrite are broken again. Another thing, bearing race is very important. Keep them with the bearing, but I'm going to be putting new bearings on, so it doesn't matter in this case again. All right, well, I'll come back when I've got this all shredded apart and see what's broken in the Lockrite. I don't have a tripod right now, so I can't really film while I'm working. So I'll be back. So I got the cap off this thing, and here you can see, like I was saying before, that this thing was a bunch of junk. This case is a slightly newer Sidekick 12-bolt ring gear case, and then the top plate is a 10-bolt plate to match the 10-bolt ring gear. So I actually put these together, and I think 2 bolts lined up, and I bolted it together and then used the drill press to drill out the other holes, because I couldn't find the parts I needed locally or in my time frame So I put together the junk I had, and it's, other than the Lockrite issues, I haven't had any problems. Oh, by the way, I found a tripod. So anyway, pull this Lockrite apart and see what we find in here. Actually, none of the pins look broken. That's interesting. Last time I took this apart with the same issue, it had, I believe, 2 broken pins. Sometimes the springs can also get smashed. And maybe I caught this one in time. Okay, it does have, so these have nesting springs, one inside the other. One of them, this spring is mangled. This is kind of a terrible design on the Lockrites. I think the Spartans are actually better. But the spring sits down in the odd round hole. You know, down at the bottom, it's got just a cylindrical hole. And then the pin from the opposite side carrier pushes on that spring and has room to move. And so that tweaks the springs back and forth. And they can get smashed and, yeah, anyway. Everything still looks fine. It's reusable. You can buy spring and pin kits, and I have a bunch of them. When I buy them, I usually get a couple at a time. But all this nonsense is definitely gonna go away and be nice having this guy instead. I'm just tired of playing with these Lockrites. The one nice thing about the Lockrites is once you're up in a trail, you just don't have to think about them. They're always on, you know, they're always working. And, you know, I've never had any problems with, you know, not being able to steer, or a lot of these kind of wives' tales you hear about front lockers. If you have good power steering and Lockrite is functioning to where it unlocks the outside wheel in the corner, like, you can steer fine. I've had this thing in the rocks, I've had it on dirt, you know, sand, obviously. The only place I haven't had it really is in the snow. I tried last winter, but I just ran out of time. I was trying to build a back window and try to come up with some kind of defrost. So that's a project for this upcoming winter. So anyway, I'm gonna package all this stuff up because I don't need it anymore, and then I'm gonna get the ring gear cleaned up, get that all cleaned up, and get the holes clean of any old Loctite, get it all degreased, and inspect it real well, make sure there's no chips or anything damage on the gears from the metal that came out. It wasn't a ton of metal, but enough to kind of raise some concerns, but I'm gonna give that a real good inspection. And then next, I believe there's a snap ring I have to pull off, get this magnet off for the ring gear to be bolted on. So I'm gonna check that out. I have to download the instructions, I haven't done that yet. So I'll come back and let you know what you gotta do. Okay, so yeah, there's this cool spiral style snap ring. You pop out of there, and then the whole magnet assembly comes off. So this is the electromagnet. And then it's, with this off, you can kind of get a better idea how this thing works. So as the magnet energizes and creates some drag on that surface, as the carrier, you know, this piece engages with the carrier, so it does not, you know, rotate freely. It rotates with the carrier. So these just wedge apart. And as they do that, they push down on those pins, and then down inside is the coupler that engages with which would be in the bottom side gear, the way this is sitting. So it's got an internal and external spline, more or less, and it locks that side gear to the carrier case. And then if one gear can't rotate, in effect, none of them can rotate, and it becomes solid inside. So I'm gonna get everything all cleaned up and get the ring gear installed. Be right back. So real quick, one thing I'm looking at, it's hard to tell, but this surface has been surface ground on some sort of rotary fixture, not just spun on a lathe. And it is super smooth and nice. I mean, I know this is an old beat up case, and 25 years old, but I mean, this was just turned on a lathe, it looks like. I'm sure, you know, to high standards, but this thing, I've rubbed my hands all over everything, every surface, and there aren't any ugly burrs or any sloppy machining. I know I've talked to several people that have these, and they've had great luck with them. I haven't heard anybody that's broken one or had any problems whatsoever. And still, just to, you know, it's not an ARB, it's not a Detroit or something, but it is, in my opinion, just as nice as anything else I've ever installed. Pretty impressed. Okay, so here we are. I got the ring gear all cleaned up, all the old Loctite cleaned out of the threads of the gear and the bolts, and then new Loctite torqued down. The fit of the ring gear was super nice. Nice, tight, slip fit. There's like a little register right here that the inside of the ring gear fits on, and had a nice good fit. It wasn't you know, it didn't take heat or press or anything, and it didn't just fall on. It just had a nice slip fit. So it's a nice little confirmation of quality right there, because those tolerances are so tight to get a nice slip fit like that. It's not easy to do. So there's a look at the other side. Oh, sorry about that. So I pulled these pins, just drop in the case, and the coupler downside spring loaded. So I pulled these out so I didn't lose them. Had it upside down with the ring gear situation, but so right now I'm waiting for new carrier bearings. So this is as far as I can go right now, unfortunately, but I will catch back up when I got new bearings. Okay, so I got the bearings installed on the carrier, and then I just finished drilling and tapping in this one's case. This is the pass-through for the wire. It's a M12 by 1.5 thread. That's for this little guy. Usually these are called a cord grip. So it's like a rubber compression fitting. So this O-ring seals against the 90 weight coming out. I'm also gonna put some thread sealer on just because this isn't a perfectly flat surface. And then you tighten this outer nut, it compresses a rubber piece in there around the wire here. The cool thing, these are reusable, so if you ever have to take this apart again, you can loosen this up and the cord will slide back out. As long as you don't go crazy tightening these, the rubber piece usually holds up pretty good to be used repeatedly. So I'm gonna get this installed. One more thing. On one of the carrier caps, you have to relieve the sides of it. I'll show this in better detail once I get the carrier set in here. But basically these fingers rest on top of the saddles that are built into the carrier, or the third member case, but they need to fit alongside of these. Again, these fingers keep the magnet from rotating, because the magnet needs to stay stationary in the case, obviously, so it doesn't rip out the wires. And then that's just how this thing works. It needs to be stationary so they can put drag on these cam plates, like I showed before. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording and then get this stuff put together, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I've got that fitting installed that I was talking about for the wiring. One thing that I'm not super happy with, and it's not the locker's fault, it's just this style of diff. As you can see, this is the oil passage for the front pinion bearing, or the outer pinion bearing. As the ring gear rotates, it throws oil into that hole to lubricate that front bearing. This guy is kind of in that path, and I think you would be in better shape the farther you could get this away from that oil path. But being that this is a sidekick, I'm going to go under the bench. Being that this is a sidekick differential, it has these cast-in mounting points for the upper wishbone on a sidekick. So this was pretty much the only place I could put it. Again, I put a high-quality thread sealer on these threads, and then it should be fine. But you know, because little details like this make a big difference, so it's just good to pay attention to stuff like that. I'm gonna get this carrier dropped in, and then I'll come back. Okay, so here I am. I'm just about done. Here you can see a little better those fingers on the electromagnet. They basically rest on the case right here, and then you gotta just relieve the cap just a little bit for that to slip by. Same thing on this side. I ground just the minimum possible, because this does get pretty thin close to the hole. So the last thing you'd want is to break through into the bolt hole. So yeah, basically set it back up. I have an 8 thousandths backlash. I think on these, off the top of my head, they're like 6 to 12 or something, but 8 is where I was before. So I'm putting it back to the same spot. Yeah, just got done getting that all set. So what I usually do now is we'll pull one bolt at a time from the caps, pull it out, Loctite it, put it back in to get those all Loctited. That way you're not kind of rushing the Loctite drying while you're playing with this, because sometimes this can be a pain to get this all just right. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and Loctite the bolts. Put the little lock fingers or whatever you call those in place, and then I will get a jumper wire and show you how to test this. Be right back. Okay, now I'm gonna test this thing. So I've got a power probe hooked up. I've got a little jumper lead for the positive side And then the negative wire on the power probe is hooked to the black wire on the electromagnet. And so I've got lines drawn on the axle shafts that are stuck in this thing. So now you can see right now, they move opposite directions. The differential's open. Now if I give it power and rotate the diff, you can see the cam plates separate. And now oops. Just don't have quite enough hands to do all this. Now the axles are locked together. I can't easily turn them because I have to rotate all the ring and pinion as well, but you take power off, rotate the other way, let things relax. Axles are open again. Pretty cool unit. Pretty easy to test. You really don't need the axles either. You can just turn the ring and pinion. With zero power, cam plates run tight to each other, and as you give it power, drag is put on this one, and it forces them to separate, which pushes in the pins, pushes in the coupler inside. Take power off, cam plates go back together. Give it power, it locks. Power off, slide back together. Pretty cool. So now that I know that it works, I'm gonna put it back in the front end. Okay, so one more thing I need to mention is this thing, when these get clearanced, you don't want this tight. It needs a little bit of freedom of movement. Not a lot, just a little bit, just so it's not cocked or whatever. It just needs to be able to move a little bit so things can move freely on their own. This under the magnet, there's a bearing, but still, like, as long as you know this has got a little wiggle, it can kind of self-center itself on its bearing and not be bound up. So something to watch for. Okay, so I got the Samurai all put back together. I didn't want to bore you with any of the just normal axle assembly. But so what I got next is the wiring, which is actually very simple. So it's got a pre-made harness, hooks to the battery, and then to the switch. It's got a built-in inline fuse. And then this is the connector I've got to install on the wires coming out of the diff itself. Sort of like a weather pack style connector. And then it's got a Carling style switch. I'm probably gonna use this temporarily, but in my Samurai I have a Switch Pro switch panel. I'm gonna do some rearranging. That lower right, it says siren. I'm gonna get rid of that because I really don't need that button. The siren controller has its own power, so when I wired this, I wasn't really thinking about the right way of doing it, I guess. So I'm gonna change that out and use that as my front locker button. And then hopefully I'll be getting one for the rear, and I'll have to figure out what I'm gonna do. So who knows, maybe I end up using the Carling switches after all, I'm not sure. I haven't even scouted around for a good spot over there. But I'll use it temporarily. So here's the pigtail coming out of the diff. So I've got to install the connector onto this, and then I'm going to make these wires follow zip tied my upper link, and then right up above here is kind of my main harness trunk. So it'll go up there and into the interior. So I'll catch you up when I get that all set up. Okay, so I'm going to do like a dry run, I guess, test. So I got the wiring hooked up and all the front ends put together. And so right now the switch is off. You can see I've got one tire on the ground. This one's in the air. You can see I got basically one tire fire going on right here. And then again, my wiring's temporary, so I'm just testing this, but turn this on. And then it locks. And now I can't turn the tire because it's locked together with that tire. And turn switch off. Free again. Very sweet. Can't wait to use this. Lock. And then it connected. Solid. All right, I'm going to try to figure out some way of testing this in my yard and show you what it looks like. Okay, so I tried to take this out in the yard, or I have kind of a bank in my front yard. Tried to flex it up and get a open and versus locked little comparison video on the video, but it's dry out, and with it being locked in the back, it just goes right up the thing in two-wheel drive. I couldn't get to spin a tire, so I am going to be doing a little more maintenance work on it and taking it out soon. So I'll post up a separate video showing the locker in use and the difference between open and fully locked. I live in the Northwest, and so we have Brown's Camp. It's kind of a good little off-road area with pretty good rock trail called Crushers. So I'm kind of itching to go hit that. And so I'll post up a separate video of that. And thanks for watching. If you have any questions on these lockers, hit me up in the comments. Like I said, so far with the install and just the quality of the components, I'm stoked. I think it's going to be an awesome upgrade. And I will post up a video of it being used, and if I have any issues or, whatever conclusion I come to, I will share. Thanks for watching.